Because in the next 8 seconds, you're going to hear something that was never meant for your ears. A secret. A buried truth. A choice so dark that the woman who made it forced everyone who witnessed it into silence. Or the grave. It begins in 1802, inside a Virginia plantation house where the walls still hold their breath. 3 cries, newborn, fragile, identical, echoed into the night. But only 2 were allowed to exist. The third? He wasn't sick. He wasn't weak. He wasn't cursed. He was simply a shade darker. And in a world built on lies about bloodlines, purity, and power, a single shade was enough to condemn an infant. Now hear this, not as entertainment, but as initiation. Because what happened that night is not just a story. It is a blueprint of how ruling families protected their legacies, controlled their narratives, and erased inconvenient truths. And every institution built on their model still uses the same pattern today. Suppression. Substitution. Erasure. Rewrite. One woman, Margaret Fairmorn, had spent her entire life living inside a cage built from her mother's expectations. A cage made of legacy, reputation, and fear. By 1802 she was cracking under the weight of a single terror. That her husband would discover what she had done the summer he was away. And who she had done it with. So when her triplets arrived, and the third child opened his eyes, as carrying a bloodline she had tried to hide, Margaret didn't scream. She didn't faint. She didn't pray. She calculated. One child was too dark. Too revealing. Too dangerous. And like every elite family built on lies, she chose the simplest solution. Erase the evidence. Rewrite the story. Control the future. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the woman she trusted to carry out her darkest command had a mind sharper than any overseer. And a memory sharper than a blade. Esther. Born enslaved, trained to be invisible, forced to swallow every injustice. Yet she was the only one in that house who understood the true cost of a lie. Tonight, I'm going to show you exactly what Esther did. Why she did it. And how her decision created a shadow lineage that survived long after the Fairmorn name dissolved into dust. Inside Margaret Fairmont's bedroom, the air was thick with sweat, candle smoke, and the quiet terror of a woman who knew exactly what she had unleashed. She gripped the bedframe as the contractions tore through her, but the pain wasn't what frightened her. It was the truth her own body might betray. Her husband Thomas paced downstairs, drinking brandy, imagining a legacy expanding. Margaret was imagining the opposite. A life collapsing. Because a year earlier, during a summer when Thomas was gone and loneliness curled around her like a serpent, she had made a choice. A choice with a name. A choice with hands, with breath, with a pulse. William. An enslaved carpenter whose skill brought him into the main house more often than most. And whose light complexion made him a convenient temptation for a woman trapped inside 17 rooms of silence. Margaret had convinced herself it meant nothing. A moment of weakness. A season of loneliness. A secret no one would ever trace. And for months, she believed she had outrun the consequences. But in the final weeks of her pregnancy, she felt something wrong. Not wrong in her body, wrong in her soul. A tightening. A whisper. A knowledge she couldn't know. One of these children might not belong to her husband. So when the first baby slid into the world, pale, strong, screaming, she exhaled. The second, smaller, but the same shade, gave her hope. Then the third arrived. And the silence in the room changed shape. Ruth froze. The doctor frowned. Esther did not move at all. Margaret saw the color immediately. A hue too warm. A shade too deep. A truth too dangerous. Her face twisted, not from pain, but from recognition. This was the child she feared. The child her marriage couldn't survive. The child society wouldn't forgive. And for a long, trembling moment, she stared at him the way a queen stares at a threat. Then she made her decision. Not with a shout. Not with a command. But with a whisper that only Esther heard. A whisper that carried the weight of centuries. Not when Margaret whispered the command that would have damned another woman. Not when Ruth turned away, pretending not to hear. Not even when the doctor nodded absently, accepting the lie before it was fully formed. Because Esther understood something that Margaret never would. The difference between fear and consequence. She held the third child, warm, breathing, alive, and felt the truth in her arms. Margaret wasn't asking her to hide an inconvenience. She was asking her to erase a human being. That was the moment something ancient inside Esther awakened. Something forged through generations of women who live beneath the weight of other people's sins. She cradled the infant close, his tiny heartbeat tapping against her chest like a warning or a promise. And as the doctor mixed tonics and Ruth fetched linens, Esther made herself invisible. Not physically, but emotionally. A blank mask. A silent obedience. The kind of mask enslaved women wore every day to survive. The kind that made white owners believe they were unseen, unheard, unthinking. But beneath that mask, her mind was a storm. She saw the path Margaret wanted her to take. A short walk into the dark. A cloth pressed to a tiny mouth. A stillness that could be explained away as failure to thrive. She had seen infants die like that. Had buried two of her own without so much as a name carved into a piece of wood. But this child. This innocent who had not asked to be born into a world sharpened by cruelty. This child was not going to be another ghost buried under someone else's shame. Margaret watched Esther with frantic eyes, searching for reassurance. And Esther gave her exactly what she needed. A slow nod. A quiet promise. A lie that tasted like iron on the tongue. "Yes, Miss Margaret," she murmured. "I'll take care of it." Margaret collapsed back onto the pillows, shaking. Not from loss, but from relief. She believed the problem was solved. She believed her secret would disappear before the sun rose. She believed Esther was exactly what she appeared to be, obedient. But Esther's steps, as she carried the baby out of the room, were not the steps of a woman completing a task. They were the steps of a woman choosing rebellion in the quietest, most dangerous way possible. You might want to sit down for this part, because once you hear it, you can't unhear it. There's a pattern, an architecture of intention, running through every forbidden chapter of this story. Not a symbol, not a code, but something worse, a geometry. A shape that keeps repeating in ruins, sealed vaults, erased maps, burned chronicles, and even in testimonies of people who swore they were followed by something that knew the pattern better than they did. It was a triangle at first, simple, harmless, until they discovered it wasn't a triangle at all. It was the shadow of something three-dimensional, cast onto two-dimensional history. The real structure had depth. And depth means layers. And layers mean secrets. The earliest record comes from a monk in 1324 who wrote that the three-point sign appeared above the bodies of the excommunicated. No one believed him. Why would they? But then, 5 centuries later, explorers found those same 3 points carved into stone, 3 stones missing from a collapsed altar as if they had been deliberately removed. Not stolen. Removed. Like someone knew what the geometry could do if completed. And here's the part that made the archivist in Lisbon lose sleep: every site where the symbol was found had something in common. A disappearance. Usually an entire family. Sometimes an entire village. Sometimes a single person who was studying the symbol itself. The geometry didn't just follow history. It erased it. There's an old Portuguese phrase that keeps showing up in these archives, scribbled in margins, carved on beams, whispered in letters never meant to be read. One três queime, levanta-se. Where 3 fall, 1 rises. Nobody could explain it. Then Esperanza uncovered the missing notebook, half-burned, water-warped, smelling of old stone. The geometry wasn't just a pattern. It was a mechanism. A lock. And someone had been trying to build the key for 7 centuries. But the notebook revealed something else. The mechanism had been activated before. At least twice. And both times, history recorded the aftermath as a plague, a fire, an accident, a disappearance. Neat, clean words that hide the kind of truth governments dream of burying. Esperanza wasn't supposed to have that notebook. She wasn't supposed to know that the geometry was incomplete. She definitely wasn't supposed to know where the final missing point was hidden. But she did. If the first 4 points of the geometry were disturbing, the 5th was catastrophic. Esperanza didn't discover it by accident. She remembered it. Not like a normal memory, fuzzy, emotional, anchored to a moment. No. Her memory worked differently. She could recall things she never lived, places she never visited, and voices she should not have been able to hear. Historians call this ancestral recall. The Church called it heresy. The Greyfield Institute called it an anomaly worth neutralizing. But Esperanza? She called it a responsibility. The key moment came when she was studying a 17th-century sketch of a monastery wall. Faded ink, worn parchment, nothing unusual, until her memory showed her a version of the image that didn't exist on the page. A memory of stone illuminated by moonlight. A wall with a crack that shouldn't be there. And within that crack, the 5th point. The missing vertex of the geometry. Her pulse hammered. She flipped the page again. Blank. No crack. No symbol. Nothing. But the memory persisted, vivid, intrusive, insistent. Like something was replaying itself inside her mind without permission. She traveled to the monastery ruins 2 days later. The locals refused to guide her. Some refused to speak at all when she mentioned the geometry. Others only said, "Things are buried for a reason." The monastery sat on a lonely hill, swallowed by vines and time. As she approached the crumbled wall, the moon rose behind her, exactly as in the memory. And just like that, the crack appeared. Not physically. Not visibly. But in a way that made her hand move as if pulled by a string. She pressed her fingers to cold stone. The wall breathed. Dust fell. Stone shifted. Something inside unlocked with a sound older than language. And then, very slowly, the symbol revealed itself, carved into the stone beneath centuries of decay. Not scratched. Not etched. Burned. As if applied with heat no human could survive. The 5th point. The one every archive claimed never existed. The one every government insisted was a myth. The one the Greyfield Institute killed to keep hidden. Esperanza stepped back, heart in her throat. Because the moment the geometry completed itself in her mind, the wind died. The insect stopped. Even the night seemed to hold its breath. Something had awakened. Something that had been waiting for her. When Esperanza traced the final point of the geometry, she didn't complete a symbol. She completed a summoning. Not of a creature, not of a ghost, not of anything your mind can comfortably categorize. What rose that night was older than language, older than belief, older than the idea of time marching in a straight line. And when it rose, it didn't appear in front of her, it appeared around her. The air thickened. Shadows grew teeth. The stone beneath her feet pulsed like a heartbeat. It wasn't evil. It wasn't benevolent. It was hungry, for completion, for purpose, for the one thing humans cling to and fear more than death, knowledge. The geometry wasn't a map toward a destination. It was the destination. The 5th point didn't complete the shape, it activated it, like turning a key in a lock that no one alive was supposed to remember existed. And as the lock turned, Esperanza saw something impossible, history folding inward like a collapsing lung. She saw the monastery as it was 400 years ago, its torches burning, its monks praying in a language that has no translation. She saw them gathered around this wall, trembling as something inside it whispered back. She saw one monk fall to his knees, begging the geometry not to open. She saw another strike him across the face and say, "It must." 3 fell so one could rise. And then, she saw the rising. A figure made not of flesh, but of intention, a silhouette of all the forgotten memories humanity has shed like dead skin. Every secret burned, every truth buried, every erased archive, every censored page. It didn't walk. It assembled itself, piece by piece, out of the things we pretend never happened. Esperanza staggered back, clutching the notebook, but the figure didn't move toward her. It didn't need to. It was inside her, rummaging, searching, recognizing. It found her ancestral memory and latched onto it like it had been waiting centuries for her bloodline to approach this wall again. Then it spoke without a mouth. "You remember because you were chosen to remember." Her pulse froze. The wind returned. The symbol flickered with heat. And then the voice whispered again, soft, certain, final. "Now you will remember what they died to forget." The ground cracked. And the thing made of memory began to rise fully. The thing rising from the geometry didn't touch Esperanza. It didn't have to. The moment it fully assembled, its edges shimmering like torn film, its center a void of unspoken centuries, Esperanza felt her consciousness slide sideways, as if someone had taken her mind off its rails and pushed it into a tunnel that wasn't meant for human thought. She wasn't seeing visions. She wasn't dreaming. She wasn't imagining. She was remembering, but the memories weren't hers. First came the sound, thousands of voices speaking the same sentence in dozens of languages, each one layered perfectly atop the others without clashing. A chorus of warnings. A chorus of obedience. A chorus of guilt. Then came the images. A vault. A sealed room built without doors. A council of people with masks shaped like the geometry's points. They weren't monks. They weren't priests. They weren't officials. They were custodians, and their purpose was simple and horrifying. To bury the knowledge that the geometry could awaken memory itself, memory stretching back to before humans even understood the concept of time. Esperanza's breath hitched as she watched them work, not through stories, not through old documents, but from inside the memory, as if standing among them. They were sealing something inside the vault, chanting under their breath, each voice adding another layer to the lock. But the thing they sealed wasn't a monster. It wasn't a demon. It wasn't even alive. It was information, raw, unbound, corrosive. A truth so complete it rewrote every mind that touched it. Her pulse thundered. Her vision blurred. She tried to pull out, to breathe, to think her way back into her own body, but the memory dragged her deeper. Now she saw the custodian leader remove his mask. A scar across his face. Sunken from years of keeping the secret. He whispered the phrase she had found in the Portuguese margins. One tres quim, levanta-se. But now she understood its real meaning. Not where three fall, one rises. But three must be sacrificed for one to rise. The geometry wasn't built to reveal truth. It was built to contain it, at the cost of blood. And someone in her lineage had been one of the three, which meant someone else had been the one who rose. The memory snapped. The world returned. The figure of intention stood inches from her, hollow and immense. She didn't know whether to scream or kneel. It leaned closer without moving. Your blood opened the fifth point, it said. Now your blood must decide whether it opens the sixth. The moment the figure spoke of a sixth point, Esperanza felt the air tighten around her, as if the world itself disapproved of what had just been said. There was no sixth point. Every archive insisted the geometry ended at 5. Every monastery record ended at 5. Every custodian oath ended at 5. 5 was the number of containment. 5 was the number of silence. 5 was the number that kept the truth buried instead of born. But the figure made of memory, this impossible entity shaped from every erased truth humanity had ever buried, did not lie. It could not lie. It was built from truth itself. Esperanza staggered back, heart pounding hard enough to bruise her ribs. The geometry burned faintly on the monastery wall behind her, glowing like embers that refused to die. 6, she whispered. There's no sixth. The figure tilted its head, the motion slow, deliberate, like a person examining a fragile object they expect to break. There was always a sixth. Its voice resonated inside her bones. Not loud. Not forceful. But absolute. She felt the ground beneath her pulse again, once, like a heartbeat. Then a second time. 2 pulses. 2 beats. 2 warnings. The figure stepped closer, but its feet never touched the earth. It hovered, controlled by laws older than gravity. Its form flickered, shifting through silhouettes of people long dead, people who had carried fragments of this forgotten knowledge before being erased for it. Esperanza steadied herself. "What is the 6th point?" she asked. The figure did not answer immediately. Instead, it raised its hand, if hand was the word, and pointed behind her. She turned. There, carved faintly into the monastery floor, hidden beneath centuries of dust, was another mark. Not a point. Not a symbol. A line. A line connecting the 5th point to something far outside the chamber, something beyond the walls, beyond the hill, beyond the world she thought she understood. A direction, not a destination. A vector. Esperanza knelt and brushed the dust aside, revealing more of the carving. The line extended into a curve, and that curve looped outward, forming a spiral. She froze. The 6th point wasn't a point. It was a path. A direction toward something the custodians had failed to destroy. Something that had survived every purge, every cleansing, every erasure. Behind her, the figure whispered. 5 contained. 6 releases. 5 buried. 6 unearths. 5 remembers. 6 reveals. Esperanza's breath turned shallow. If the custodians killed for 5, what would they do to stop 6? The figure leaned close, its voice dropping to a whisper carved from echoes. Your bloodline opened the 5th. Only you can walk the 6th. Her hand shook. The spiral on the floor began to glow. And far, far below the monastery, something began to move. The ground trembled, not violently, not like an earthquake, but with the slow, deliberate rhythm of something waking after a very long sleep. Dust drifted from the cracked ceiling. Old stones groaned. The spiral carved into the floor pulsed with a dull, hungry light. Esperanza stepped back, but the spiral's glow followed her, bending, shifting, reacting as though it recognized her. It wasn't a symbol. It wasn't a map. It was an invitation. Behind her, the figure of memory hovered, its form flickering through faces, some ancient, some recent, some belonging to people she felt she should know but didn't. One face lingered. A woman with Esperanza's cheekbones, her sharp jawline, her eyes. Her ancestor. A custodian. And the one who had been sacrificed to complete the 5th point centuries ago. The figure's voice echoed without sound. She opened it once. You will open it fully. Esperanza swallowed hard, but the air tasted like stone dust and old secrets, like a library that had burned centuries before she was born. What lies below? She demanded. The figure didn't answer. It didn't need to. The floor did. The spiral rotated with a grinding crack, splitting into segments that folded inward like petals peeling open. Beneath the monastery floor was a darkness so absolute it seemed to swallow the light around it. Not a cave. Not a tunnel. A shaft. A vertical descent carved into the earth with precision no human hand could replicate. Cold air surged upward, carrying scents that didn't belong together, old parchment, rusted metal, wet soil, and something faintly electrical, like the air before a storm. Esperanza's instincts screamed to run. Her bloodline whispered to descend. She took one step forward. The figure floated beside her, watching, waiting, its presence both comforting and terrifying, like standing beside the embodiment of truth itself. Why me? She whispered. And for the first time, the figure's voice sounded almost human. Because you are the last one who can open it without ending everything above it. Her heart slammed in her chest. The spiral brightened. The shaft beckoned. She looked down. Far below, faintly visible in the abyss, was another glow. A circle this time. A chamber. And within that chamber, a door. A door shaped exactly like the geometry, 5 points around a central void. But something was wrong. One of the points, the sixth one, was moving. As if something behind the door was pushing it outward. Esperanza exhaled. This wasn't a discovery. This was a countdown. Behind her, the figure whispered. The sixth point has waited for you for centuries. The floor shook again, harder. Stone cracked. Time seemed to hold its breath. She stepped to the edge of the shaft. And then, without hesitation, she began to descend. The descent took longer than it should have. The shaft twisted, curved, narrowed, widened, like it was alive, adjusting itself to her presence. The deeper Esperanza went, the colder the air became until every breath felt like inhaling the memory of a glacier. Her footsteps echoed strangely, not as separate sounds, but as a single repeating pulse, matching the beat beneath the earth. Matching the beat of the thing behind the sixth point. At last, her boots hit solid stone. She stood in a circular chamber carved with perfect mathematical precision, angles too clean for human tools, symmetry too flawless for ancient hands. The walls were covered in engraved lines that moved when she tried not to look at them, forming the geometry again and again, led like pages of a book written all at once. In the center of the chamber stood the door. It wasn't made of wood. Or stone. Or metal. It was made of memory. A structure of shifting images, flickering between centuries, sometimes a wooden gate, sometimes an iron vault, sometimes a set of clay slabs wrapped in symbols too old to name. But the shape always returned to the same form. 5 points fixed. 1 point drifting, pushing outward, like a heartbeat against ribs. Esperanza approached carefully, her breath forming white clouds. She felt the figure enter the chamber behind her, though it made no sound. It hovered near the vault, its presence bending the air like heat. The sixth point pulsed again. Then again. Then harder. Each pulse shook dust from the ceiling, rattled the bones of the world, and sent a low groan through the chamber, like the earth warning her that what she was about to do was irreversible. "Tell me what's behind it," she whispered. The figure didn't answer with words. It answered with a memory. Suddenly Esperanza stood in a vast hall she had never seen. Custodians gathered in a ring, each holding a fragment of the geometry etched onto skin, metal, or bone. In the center of the hall was the same door, closed, sealed, pulsing faintly. The leader of the custodians spoke. "If the sixth point opens, the truth will not set humanity free. It will unmake everything they believe." Another custodian replied. "Then let it never open." But Esperanza's ancestor, her eyes fierce, her face gaunt, stepped forward. "We cannot bury memory forever." The leader struck her across the face. "We can. And we will." The vision shattered. Esperanza was back in the chamber, pulse racing, and the sixth point now glowed with a dangerous, furious light. The figure leaned in close. They buried the truth to protect themselves, not the world. Her courage cracked. But her purpose hardened. She reached out. The moment her fingertips touched the drifting sixth point, the chamber roared like a collapsing universe. The point expanded, spinning into shape, locking itself into the geometry with a sound like 1,000 doors slamming shut at once. No. Not shutting. Opening. The door cracked down the middle. Light bled through. Not white. Not gold. Not anything earthly. A light that felt like revelation and extinction at the same time. Esperanza staggered. The figure whispered. "What comes out cannot be returned." The crack widened. And behind the door, something began to breathe. The breath that slipped through the widening fracture was not warm. It was cold, impossibly cold, cold like deep ocean trenches, cold like the space between stars, cold like the first night after the last fire on Earth has died. It didn't rush out. It seeped, slow and deliberate, like it was tasting the world it hadn't touched in centuries. Esperanza froze. The breath carried no scent, no sound, only a pressure. A pressure that pressed against her thoughts, her memories, her sense of self, like invisible fingers leafing through the pages of her mind. She stumbled back, clutching her head as faint whispers flooded her skull. Not words. Not voices. Just remembering. Memories that weren't hers. Memories that weren't human. Memories from something that had observed the rise and fall of humanity from behind the sealed door. The crack widened further. A sliver of pure, impossible light spilled out, bending across the chamber in patterns her brain couldn't properly process. The walls reacted instantly, engravings shifting, spirals tightening, shapes rearranging to form something like warnings or instructions or both. Behind her, the figure of memory flickered violently, as if the thing behind the door was pulling at its essence. Esperanza forced herself forward, though every instinct begged her to run, to flee, to forget everything she had uncovered. "What are you?" she whispered. The thing behind the door answered with another breath. And this time, embedded in that breath was a single, unmistakable word, spoken not through ears, but through every cell in her body. Origins. Her knees weakened. The thing wasn't a creature. It wasn't a monster. It wasn't even a being. It was the original record, the first memory of humanity, the raw, unfiltered truth of where they came from, what they were meant to be, and what had been taken from them before history began. The custodian sealed it away because truth, in its pure form, was dangerous, too vast, too overwhelming, too destabilizing. Civilizations might survive lies, but the truth could break them. The crack expanded again. Now Esperanza could see a shape behind the light, not solid, not defined, but shifting, like a silhouette trapped inside a storm of memory fragments. It reached toward her, not with a hand, but with recognition, as if it knew her, had always known her, had waited for her bloodline to return. The figure beside her trembled. For the first time, it sounded afraid. "You cannot let it fully emerge." Esperanza's heart hammered. "But you said I'm the only one who can open it." The figure turned to her, its form unraveling at the edges. Open is not the same as release. The chamber shook. Stone cracked. The sixth point pulsed like a dying star. Behind the door, the silhouette leaned closer, its voice echoing inside her ribs. "Come closer, Esperanza. Remember what was taken from us." Her hand lifted. Against her will. She stepped toward the light. 1 step. 2 steps. Truth was calling her. And if she answered, nothing in the world above would remain the same. The first weeks of the hidden child's life unfolded like a whispered rebellion against the order of the plantation. No one announced his existence. No one wrote his name. No one dared speak of the night he was born except in fragments, exchanged behind cabin doors when the wind was loud enough to swallow secrets. But in the shadowed corners of the quarters, a story was beginning to take root, quiet as breath, dangerous as truth. Dina kept the child close, wrapped in old linens that carried the scent of tobacco smoke and dried herbs. She fed him goat's milk warmed over coals, rocking him in a rhythm older than the plantation itself. And as the days passed, his skin deepened into a warm, unmistakable bronze, a color that could never be explained by Margaret's lineage or Thomas's pride. Esther visited often, always after dark, always silently. She would slip into Dina's cabin and stand over the infant, watching his chest rise and fall, his small fingers curl and uncurl. Each time she looked at him, she felt the same twin ache, the memory of her own dead children, and the knowledge that she had just committed an act that could get her whipped, sold, or killed. Dina sensed it too. "You know this won't stay hidden forever," she murmured one night, her voice thin as candle smoke. "Secrets grow legs on plantations. They walk." Esther's answer came slowly, spoken like a vow she wished she could unmake. "Then I'll cut their legs off." This child didn't ask to be born into a lie. But lies have a scent, and plantation dogs always find it. 3 weeks after the birth, Thomas ordered a new census of the quarters, something he rarely did, but the arrival of 2 legitimate heirs had forced him to review all labor records. It was routine, bureaucratic, a matter of numbers and inventory. Yet that casual decision sent a fracture line through Esther's stomach. If an overseer walked into Dina's cabin, if he saw the child, if he questioned anything, the secret would not just unravel. It would burn. That night, Esther approached Dina with a grim urgency. "Hide him," she whispered. "Not in the cabin. Not near the others. Until the count is done." Dina blinked. "And where you think I can hide a whole baby, Esther?" Esther's answer was the kind that chills a man even 2 centuries later. Esther led Dina through the night like a woman moving toward a crime she had already accepted. The moon hung low, casting thin silver strips across the fields, illuminating the shapes of cabins, tools left in the dirt, the silhouettes of the tobacco barns. Every sound felt amplified, the crunch of leaves beneath their feet, the distant hoot of an owl, the soft, questioning whimper of the hidden infant. Dina clutched him close, wrapped tight against her ribs, while Esther moved ahead with a certainty born from years of knowing which paths were safe and which ones swallowed people whole. They approached the place few dared to go after dark, the old root cellar, half collapsed, built long before the Fairmonts first claimed the land. No overseer ever stepped inside. It wasn't useful, not for food, not for labor. It was a forgotten wound in the earth. And forgotten wounds make perfect hiding places. Esther pried open the crooked wooden door. It groaned like something alive. Damp air exhaled up from the depths, carrying the scent of earth, old wood, and something older, something buried beneath generations of silence. Dina hesitated, clutching the child tighter. "This place," she whispered. "I don't like its feel." Esther's voice was steady, but her hand shook. "That's why it's safe." She descended first, her bare feet finding the packed dirt floor. Dina followed, trembling, whispering prayers under her breath. Inside, only slivers of moonlight filtered through gaps in the warped ceiling. It wasn't enough to see clearly, but enough to feel the weight of the underground pressing in on all sides. "You'll put him here?" Dina asked, her voice cracking. "In the cold?" "In the dark." "Just for a few hours," Esther said. "Wrapped warm. Hidden. No one will check this place. They never do." But as they settled him into a small cradle of blankets behind an old barrel, something shifted in the darkness. A soft thump. A stirring. Dina froze. "Rats," she whispered. Esther shook her head slowly. The sound was heavier than rats. Intentional. Like a palm brushing against earth. For a moment, neither woman breathed. Then Dina whispered something almost inaudible, "There's people buried under here. From before Thomas's time. My grandmother told me." Esther swallowed. "The dead don't rise." But the infant suddenly stirred, eyes opening wide, staring into the pitch black behind the barrel, then smiling. At nothing. At something. At someone. The storm had already crawled over the mountains by the time Esperanza reached the abandoned telegraph station, a place the Greyfield Consortium had scrubbed from every modern map, but not from the old maritime chart she carried like a second pulse. The building slouched against the wind, its windows boarded, its roof half collapsed, yet something inside flickered with a quiet, unnatural life. Not electricity. Not fire. Something older. The door groaned open as if pushed by invisible fingers. Inside, the air smelled of wet stone and old ink. Esperanza raised her lantern. A room unfolded before her, empty tables, rusted telegraph keys, coils of wire, all dusted with the untouched silence of decades. But what froze her wasn't the decay. It was the object resting perfectly centered on the main desk, as though placed there for her. A ledger bound in blackened leather, stamped with a crest she had only seen once before, on the inside lining of her mother's coffin. 3 interlocking circles. The mark of the Triptych Guild, the clandestine arm of Greyfield responsible for operations too dark to archive, too important to destroy. Her pulse surged. She opened the book. Inside were names. Dates. Coordinates. Ship manifests. Ritual schedules. Then, entries labeled Sovereign Induction. And beneath them, diagrams, anatomical sketches of the human mind rendered like a haunted cartographer's map, folds, pathways, pressure points, notes on extraction, imprinting, overwriting. On page 47, she found it. Her mother's signature. Esperanza's breath stilled. The ink was faded but unmistakable, long confident strokes, a trailing flourish at the end. Her mother always signed with flair, even when the world was watching. But here, the signature was attached to something monstrous. A list titled, "The 5 Who Must Forget." 5 names. Each erased from public memory. Each declared lost, presumed dead. And beside the 4th, Esperanza de Lima. Age, 6. Status, successful erasure. Destination, Santa Maria Transport, Hold C. Her knees softened. Her childhood had never been real. Not forgotten, constructed. Fabricated by the same hands that had sought to erase her. But why? As if in answer, the lantern's flame lurched sideways. A draft? No. Footsteps scraped behind her, slow, deliberate, careful not to startle prey. Esperanza shut the ledger and turned. A tall figure stood in the doorway, rain dripping from a hood stitched with the 3 circles of the Triptych Guild. The stranger raised their head just enough for her to see pale, unblinking eyes that recognized her with chilling familiarity. The night pressed close around the old root cellar, thicker and heavier than the soil above it. Esther and Dina stood frozen, the infant's soft, inexplicable smile stretching through the darkness like a thread tied to something they could not see. Then, a sound. Not scratching. Not shifting dirt. Something slower, like breath leaking through old earth. Dina took a step back. Esther, somebody's down here. No, Esther insisted, but her voice trembled. There's no one in this cellar but us. But that wasn't true. The darkness was full of presence. Shadows clung too tightly to the corners. The air felt disturbed, stirred from beneath the floorboards, as if something buried far under them had rolled over in its grave, or woken. Dina's whisper was barely sound. My grandmother said the root cellar was built on the first graves. Before the Fairmorn house. Before the plantation. Before the split. What split? Esther asked, eyes never leaving the shadows. The family line, Dina murmured. The ones who owned this land before Thomas's people came. They said they were different. Strange. Children born wrong. Blood that didn't die easy. Esther stiffened. Old stories. Scare stories. But they buried them here, Dina whispered. Beneath us. And some said their bodies never stayed still. Something thumped again, lightly, deliberately, from beneath the packed dirt floor. A heartbeat. A knock. A calling. The infant cooed happily. Then the root cellar's thin wooden door, still ajar at the top of the stairs, creaked. Not from wind, the air was dead still, but from weight. As if someone slowly pressed their hand against it. Esther grabbed Dina's wrist. We're leaving. Now. But the baby wasn't afraid. He reached upward, chubby hands grasping at the air, fingers curling as if clutching invisible hair, invisible skin, invisible arms lifting him. No, Dina gasped, snatching him back. His body resisted for half a second, as though another set of unseen hands still held him. The breath in the cellar turned icy. A voice, faint, broken by soil and decades, whispered just one word. Return. Esther's eyes widened. Dina clutched the child close. And from the floor, from beneath the earth, came a second whisper, this one clearer. The word Vmini clung to the dirt-thick air like wet breath. Dina staggered backward, nearly slipping on the uneven ground as she clutched the child close to her chest. Esther stepped in front of them instinctively, though her pulse pounded so loudly she felt it in her teeth. The root cellar seemed smaller now, its walls tighter, as if the earth itself had leaned inward to listen. Who's there? Esther demanded, though she didn't expect an answer, not one she wanted, anyway. The reply came not as a voice but a vibration through the floor, a slow, deliberate shifting beneath the packed dirt. Grains trembled, pebbles ticked softly against one another. Whatever was beneath them wasn't scratching or clawing. It was reaching. Dina shook her head violently. It's not a spirit. I don't feel a spirit. Spirits don't move Earth like this. Her words came fast, terrified. This is something else. The baby reached out again, tiny fingers curling toward the trembling ground, toward the thing beneath. This time his smile faltered, turning curious, almost expectant. As if he recognized what called to him. No, Dina whispered fiercely. You don't take him. I don't care who you are. The floor bulged. Just slightly. Like a mound of soil rising as something pressed from below. Esther grabbed Dina's arm and pulled her toward the stairs, but the wooden steps creaked, groaned, as if resisting their escape, as if the whole structure had been waiting decades for this moment. Move, Esther hissed, pushing Dina upward. Don't look back. Don't. The baby did. His gaze fixed on the bulging patch of earth as it swelled higher, then split. A thin line of cracking dirt peeled open, revealing not bone, not rot, not the pale fingers of the long dead, but a clump of impossibly black roots pushing up through the break. Roots that twitched slightly, like tendrils searching. They weren't plant roots, not truly. They had joints. They moved with intent. Dina screamed and surged up the stairs. Esther slammed the cellar door the moment they burst out into the night, breathing wildly. But before the latch clicked, a whisper seeped through the thin wood in a voice lower, closer, and unmistakably aware. Bring him back. The latch rattled again, harder this time. Not frantic. Testing. Measuring. As if the thing beneath the cellar had all the patience in the world and knew the wood would give eventually. Dina stumbled back across the grass, clutching the baby close. Esther moved beside her, eyes locked on the cellar door. They were exposed out here, nothing but the wide-open night and the endless fields around them, stretching like a dark sea. We can't stay near it, Esther said. Whatever's down there, it's waking up. Dina's voice cracked. It spoke. Esther, it spoke. I know. That means it's not mindless. I know. It wants him. Not us. Him. Esther turned toward her sharply. Then we get him away from here. Away from the cellar. Away from the graves. Now. They hurried across the yard, bare feet striking the cold ground. Every step felt watched. The farmhouse loomed ahead, the slave cabins farther off, small squares of shadow. Somewhere in the distance, a lone dog barked once, then fell silent as though warned. But the baby twisted in Dina's arms again. Reaching behind them. Toward the cellar. His tiny brows furrowed. He wasn't crying. He was listening. Stop looking back, Esther hissed. Don't meet its call. But Dina's breath stuttered. What if he feels something? What if he knows it? What if whatever's under there is kin? Kin doesn't claw its way through 2 feet of earth to take a child, Esther snapped. Kin doesn't whisper through soil. The ground shuddered faintly beneath them, a ripple, as though a wave traveled through the roots, spreading outward from the cellar toward the fields. Even the grass bowed slightly in its wake. As if something enormous moved beneath. Esther grabbed Dina's elbow. Run. They reached the farmhouse porch, but before Esther could wrench open the door, the baby went rigid. Silent. Eyes wide. Staring past them, back toward the dark yard. Then he giggled. A small, innocent sound. But the kind that didn't belong here. Not while the ground behind them bulged in a slow, dreadful rise. Not while the soil cracked in a long, thin line stretching outward from the cellar, like a newborn vein forming across the land. Dina screamed. Esther shoved them through the farmhouse door and slammed it shut. Outside, the earth whispered. Blood remembers. The farmhouse door slammed so hard the windows rattled in their frames. Esther threw the bolt, shoved a chair beneath the handle, then pressed her back to the wood, chest heaving. Silence. Not peace, just a waiting kind of quiet, thick and breathing. Dina clutched the baby so tightly her arms trembled. He had gone still again, overly still. His eyes darted around the dim kitchen, tracking sounds only he could hear. Esther, Dina whispered, her voice thin. What if the house isn't safe either? Esther didn't answer. She couldn't. Because the house was older than the cellar. Older than the barns. Built by the first settlers, the strange ones. The ones Dina's grandmother called the keepers. And in the moonlight slipping through the warped shutters, the walls looked wrong. Too pale. Too smooth. Like skin stretched over old bone. A slow creak traveled up the staircase. One step. Then another. Dina's breath hitched. Is someone awake? No, Esther said quickly. Everyone's asleep. No one else is in this house tonight. Then who? Or what? Was walking upstairs? The baby cooed softly, leaning toward the sound. The stairwell answered with a low groan, as if weight shifted from one foot to another. Dina backed up until she hit the kitchen table. We have to go, she whispered. Not up. Not down. Out the window, now. Esther grabbed her arm. If it's in the house, outside might be worse. That thing moved the earth like water. It's spreading. A thud came from the second floor. A door opening. Esther's voice dropped to a whisper. It's searching. Dina covered the baby's ears, even though covering wouldn't help. He wasn't hearing with his ears. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs. Slow. Heavy. Intentional. Something descended. Esther held her breath, gripping the nearest object, a rusted fire poker, like a weapon. Dina pressed herself against the far wall, shaking so hard she thought her bones would rattle. The baby reached out toward the dark doorway. And then, a voice drifted down the stairs. Female. Soft. Too soft. Words stretched thin, like breath sliding through teeth. Bring him to me. Not the voice from the cellar. Not the whisper through earth. Something else. Something upstairs. Something alive, or close enough. Esther shook her head violently. There's more than one. Dina's legs nearly gave out. The baby smiled. The voice drifted down the staircase again, soft, coiling through the air like a ribbon of warm breath. Bring him, upstairs. Esther's grip tightened around the fire poker. The metal trembled in her hand. Don't listen, she whispered. Don't you dare listen. But Dina couldn't move. Her legs felt carved from stone. The baby wriggled in her arms, twisting happily, reaching toward the stairs as if someone he loved waited just out of sight. And maybe, in the twisted logic of the bloodline he carried. Someone did. A shadow passed along the upstairs landing, slow, deliberate. Not approaching. Not rushing. Watching. Dina pressed back against the wall, her voice barely audible. That voice. I know it. Esther jolted. What do you mean you know it? I heard it once, Dina whispered. Years ago. After Thomas left. In this house. At night. I thought it was a dream. Her eyes filled with terror. It wasn't. The floorboards above them creaked again, one long, dragging step. Then another. Each step carried the faint rhythm of someone walking with a heavy problem in their bones. Esther swallowed hard. Dina, who did you hear? My mother. Esther nearly dropped the poker. Your mother died in this house before you were old enough to remember, she said firmly. You told me that yourself. I didn't remember her voice, Dina whispered, shaking her head. But when I heard that sound, once, years ago, it felt familiar. Like something waking up in my blood. The baby cooed again, louder this time. The shadow on the stairs stilled, as if listening. Come to me, the voice breathed. My beautiful boy. Esther stepped in front of Dina again. Your mother is gone, she snapped. Whatever is up there is not her. But Dina's face twisted with confusion. Pain. Recognition. Then why does it sound like love? The kitchen floor trembled, subtle, but real. A warning ripple from below the foundation. The thing in the earth had not stopped its slow advance. And now there was something above them too. The house itself felt trapped between two hungers. Something upstairs beckoned with a mother's voice. Something below whispered with a grave's patience. And the baby? The baby reached toward both. The stairs creaked one more time. Then the upstairs voice changed. Softer. Sharper. Closer. Dina. Open the door. The sound of her own name, Dina, spoken in that soft, coaxing tone, cracked something open inside her. It had the warmth of memory, the sweetness of comfort, the impossible familiarity of a mother she had never truly known. The voice that had sung to her as an infant, if her grandmother's stories were true. But there was something else braided through the tenderness. Hunger. Esther felt it immediately. She stepped closer to the stairwell, lifting the fire poker like a shield. Don't answer it, she hissed. Whatever that thing is, it's wearing your mother's voice like a mask. The house settled around them, a low groan of beams, an old ache waking in the walls. Dina pressed her back harder against the wooden table. She died here, Esther. Right in this house. What if the land kept her? The same way it kept them. She wouldn't call to the baby, Esther shot back. She wouldn't ask you to open the door in the middle of the night. Don't fool yourself. But Dina's breath was trembling. You didn't hear her. The way she said my name. The upstairs floor creaked again. Then again. Slow, patient steps approaching the top of the staircase. Esther didn't retreat. She moved forward, fire poker angled upward, as if daring whatever wore that voice to show itself. Stop, the voice whispered, this time from the landing itself. Too close. Too clear. You'll frighten him. Esther froze. Because now the tone had changed. Less motherly, more knowing. Not coaxing Dina anymore, addressing Esther. Speaking to her. You always stood in the way, the voice continued. Even before you understood what you were blocking. A shadow stretched along the landing wall. Long, thin. Moving with a gait that did not match the slow, dragging steps they heard before. It was quieter now, purposeful. The baby began to fuss, soft whimpers building behind Dina's ribs. Dina clamped a hand over his tiny body, rocking him desperately. Hush, baby. Hush. Let me see him, the voice crooned. Just once. Just a glimpse of the child of our line. Esther sucked a sharp breath. Your mother didn't belong to that line, she whispered to Dina, not looking away from the stairs. But something else in this house did. Something older. Something that learned to talk through her voice. A pause. Then, from the top of the stairs, the voice dropped its warmth like a broken shell. Let me see what we made. The words hit Dina like a slap, let me see what we made. Her knees buckled. She clutched the baby so tight his small cries muffled against her chest. Esther moved in front of her again, the fire poker raised. But this time, even she couldn't hide the tremor in her arms. The shadow on the upstairs landing stretched longer, as if whatever stood there had leaned closer, craning its neck down the staircase. The steps creaked, but not from weight. From anticipation. Don't move, Esther whispered. But Dina could barely breathe. What does it mean, she choked. Who is speaking through her voice? Not your mother, Esther said. Not any person. Something in this house. Something bound to the land. Something that wants him. The baby suddenly giggled, high, sharp, delighted. The shadow froze. Then the voice grew softer, slicker. It slid down the staircase like oil. He knows me. A pause, like a smile forming. He feels us. Dina trembled so hard she nearly dropped him. No, he's scared. He's reacting to the fear. But he wasn't scared. His little hands reached out again. Not toward the voice, but toward the ceiling, as if he felt something moving above them, crawling along the beams of the house. Esther took one step up the stairs. I don't know who you are, she said through clenched teeth, but you won't come down those stairs. A soft laugh drifted through the beams. Not from the landing. From above. You're facing the wrong way, Esther. The ceiling boards above the staircase bowed downward, just slightly, like something heavy slid across them. Dina let out a strangled sob. Esther, it's not standing on the landing anymore. A long, jointed shadow stretched across the ceiling. Too many bends. Too many limbs. It crawled silently, like something remembering how a body worked. Esther staggered back, looking up, just in time to see a pale, elongated hand slip between two ceiling planks. Fingers first. Then a wrist that bent wrong. Then part of an arm that looked almost human but moved like it was learning its shape. The voice whispered from everywhere and nowhere. Don't be afraid. Your family. The hand reached down, grasping the top stair. Not descending. Lowering itself. Dina screamed. The baby reached out joyfully. The pale hand gripped the top stair, its fingers long and delicate, bending at angles no joint should allow. The skin wasn't corpse pale, it was milk pale, almost translucent, as if whatever lived inside it had never known the sun, never needed to. The arm that followed slid through the ceiling gap with a soft, wet sound. Not breaking wood. Not forcing its way through. The house was letting it out. Dina pressed her back to the wall, holding the baby so close he squeaked. Esther raised the fire poker again, but her hand shook so violently the metal rattled. The voice came again, this time from the dangling hand itself, as if the sound traveled through the bones. Don't run. You've come so far already. Then the fingers flexed. Every knuckle popped like cracking twigs. Another hand emerged beside the first. Then a head, tilted sideways, sliding down through the boards like a puppet pulled by invisible strings. Its hair hung in thin, damp strands. Its face. Dina gasped. Because the face was almost beautiful. Almost human. Almost familiar. It was her mother's face. But stretched. Smoothed. Eyes too wide and glassy, pupils too large, as though they'd grown in the dark for generations. Dina, the thing whispered with her mother's stolen tongue. You look just like I remember. Esther took a step forward. That's not her. Don't listen. But the creature smiled, lips too thin, too long, pulling at a face that didn't fully fit. You weren't supposed to survive, it murmured. The land wanted you. But your grandmother stole you off the soil before we could claim you. Its eyes drifted toward the baby. But this one you brought right back to us. The baby giggled again, thrilled, reaching out with both hands as the creature lowered itself further. Its limbs were too flexible, bending like wet branches. Its body slid more than climbed. Put him down, the thing whispered. Let me see our little heir. Esther swung the fire poker, screaming. The metal smashed into the railing, but the creature wasn't there anymore. It had dropped, silently, landing behind them with a soft thud. Dina spun, choking on a cry. The creature crouched inches away, head tilted, wide black eyes shining. Give him to me, it cooed. The earth wants him back. The creature lowered itself into a crouch so fluid, so silent, it felt like watching a shadow rearrange itself rather than a body move. Its elongated fingers pressed into the wooden floorboards, dimpling them as if the house softened beneath its touch. The baby, Dina's impossible, hidden, forbidden child, stretched out both hands toward the creature eagerly, laughing in that pure, bubbling way only infants can. As if he recognized it. As if some part of him belonged to whatever stood before them. "Stay behind me," Esther whispered, though she knew the command meant nothing against what had slipped out of the ceiling. Her legs trembled, her breath thinned, but she raised the poker again. The creature didn't even look at her. Its eyes, black as wet soil, wide as a hungry night, remained locked on the child. "You hid him," it said calmly, almost fondly. "You thought you could break the pattern. But this land remembers every trespass. This family, this bloodline, was never yours to alter." Dina clutched the baby so tightly he whimpered. "I ain't giving him to you." Her voice cracked, but it held. The creature's expression shifted, flickering irritation beneath a mask of stolen beauty. "You don't even know what he is," it whispered. "What he carries. What was promised before either of you were born." The house groaned as if agreeing. Shutters slammed upstairs. A door banged open down the hall. Something walked in the attic above, a dragging, four-limbed gait that matched the creature's impossible posture. Esther's voice came low, urgent. "Dina, move. Now." But Dina shook her head. "No. I want answers." The creature smiled, a slow, predatory unfurling. "Then listen closely. You humans think inheritance is chosen. A will. A ledger. A child named after a father. But real inheritance, the kind that shapes centuries, is older than law. Older than this country. Older than any of you." It leaned forward. This land knew the Fairmonts before the Fairmonts knew themselves. A shudder rolled through the entire house. And suddenly, the baby stopped crying. Stopped laughing. Stopped moving at all. He stared at the creature, eyes wide, as if responding to a silent command. Dina's breath hitched. She could feel the child's heartbeat racing, too strong, too fast, as if something inside him was waking up. "Give him to me," the creature crooned softly, "and he will rise to what he was always meant to be." Dina's grip tightened. Esther whispered, "Don't you dare."